People who left their partner the day of the wedding. What happened? Story 1. I, 31 now, was supposed to marry my ex-fiancée Claire, 35 now, 6 years ago. We'd been together since I was 21, met right after I graduated college with my IT degree. She was 25, a schoolteacher, and I thought I'd hit the jackpot. Smart, beautiful, seemed to love me. We got engaged after 4 years together. Wedding was planned for a Saturday in June. Big church ceremony, 200+ guests, the whole 9 yards. I was nervous but excited. This was supposed to be the start of our forever. Here's where it gets messed up. The night before the wedding, we're staying in separate hotels, her idea, tradition and all that. Around 11 p.m., I realize I left my phone charger at her place, so I drive over to grab it real quick. I had a key, figured I'd be in and out. I walk into the bedroom, and there's Claire, unclothed on top of some jacked dude I'd never seen before. In our bed. The bed I bought. The night before our wedding. They didn't even notice me at first. I just stood there in shock for like 10 seconds before Claire looked over and went white as a sheet. Oh, it's not what it looks like. Really, Claire? Because it looks like you're screwing another man 12 hours before you're supposed to marry me. The guy, turns out he was from her gym, the membership I was paying for, just smirked at me and said, "Awkward timing, bro. Awkward timing. This mother effer." Claire starts crying, jumping up, trying to explain. Turns out they'd been hooking up for months. While I was at work, earning the money that paid for her gym membership, her car insurance, her everything because teaching doesn't pay enough, and I want to focus on the wedding planning. I didn't say a word. Just turned around and left. Got back to my hotel, called the only person I could think of, my best man Jake. Told him what happened. He came over immediately with a bottle of whiskey, and we just sat there until like 4 a.m. trying to figure out what to do. The wedding was in 8 hours. Venue paid for, guests flying in from out of state. Claire's dad had dropped like $40,000 on this thing. But I couldn't do it. I just couldn't stand up there and promise to love and honor someone who had been betraying me in the worst possible way. So at 7 a.m., I called Claire's mom and told her what I'd seen. She went silent for the longest time, then just said, "Oh honey, I'm so sorry." Turns out Claire's own mother suspected something was up, but hoped she was wrong. Called my parents next. My dad just said, "Son, you don't owe anyone anything. Don't you dare go through with this." By 9 a.m., ceremony was at 2 p.m. I was packed and driving to my brother's place 3 states away. Left my wedding suit hanging in the hotel closet. Jake handled telling the wedding party. My parents dealt with my side of the family. I just disappeared. Claire blew up my phone. 67 missed calls, 200+ texts. Everything from, "It was a mistake," to "He means nothing," to "Please don't abandon me on our wedding day." Then it turned nasty. "You're a coward. You never really loved me. Real men fight for their relationships. Real men don't marry cheaters, Claire." The aftermath was nuclear. Our mutual friends took sides. Most of them believed Claire's version, that I abandoned her over nothing and was emotionally abusive for leaving without explanation. She spun this narrative that I was controlling and she had to find comfort elsewhere. She tried to get me fired from my job, calling my boss and telling him I was unstable and had threatened her. I had to show him screenshots of her begging me to come back to prove she was lying. The divorce, we weren't married but had to untangle finances, was messy. She kept the engagement ring, obviously, and I was out about $15,000 in wedding costs that couldn't be refunded. Here's the kicker. She married the gym guy 3 months later. Posted all over social media about finding her soulmate and finally being with someone who appreciates her. That lasted 2 years. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Last month, 6 years after I left her at the altar, she started texting me again. Started friendly. "Hi Opie, long time no see, how are you?" Then desperate. "I made the biggest mistake of my life. You were the only man who ever truly loved me." Then the bomb. "Gym guy hurts me, Opie. He's nothing like you. I don't know what to do." Y'all. I screenshot every single message and sent them to one of our old mutual friends, asking him to check on her if she's really in danger, because I'm not getting involved. This friend calls me a monster for not rushing to help her. Then Claire's whole friend group starts messaging me on Facebook, had to reactivate it just to see the drama, calling me heartless for abandoning her again. I lost my shit. Posted every screenshot I had, from 6 years ago when she was begging me not to leave her, to last month when she was trying to get back together. The whole timeline of her cheating, lying, and now trying to manipulate me again. Suddenly everyone went quiet. Claire's still texting me, now calling me evil and saying I never loved her. The irony is effing rich. Am I the asshole for leaving her at the altar? Maybe. But I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Best decision I ever made. I'm 31, have my own place, great job, actual friends who didn't judge me for refusing to marry a cheater. I date when I want to, but I'm not rushing into anything serious. Trust issues are real, but I'm working on them. Sometimes the trash takes itself out. Sometimes you have to leave it at the altar. Edit. For everyone asking, no, I don't regret it. Yes, it was expensive. No, I'm not taking her back. And yes, Gym Guy apparently turned out to be exactly the kind of guy who cheats on his fiancée the night before the wedding. Edit 2. Someone asked about the mutual friend who called me a monster. Yeah, I blocked him. Anyone who thinks I should rescue my cheating ex-wife from the consequences of her own choices can F right off. Edit 3. Claire, if you're reading this, and let's be honest, you probably are, the answer is still no. Find a therapist, not an ex-husband. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. I remember the light in the bridal suite that morning, golden warm, almost like the universe was blessing the day. My dress was laid out like a dream, this perfect swirl of silk and lace that made me look like someone in a fairy tale. I should have been excited. I should have been glowing. Instead, I was staring at myself in the mirror, feeling like I was about to step into a cage with velvet bars. Outside, the villa was buzzing. 100 guests, dressed to the nines, sipping champagne, waiting for me. The planners were checking the flowers, and the violinist was warming up. Everything was exactly how we had planned it: lavish, romantic, and extravagant. Liam was already at the altar. I knew that smile he'd be wearing. Hopeful, a little nervous, pretending everything was okay. But it wasn't okay. It hadn't been for a long time. I think I knew deep down for months. His family had this way of wrapping themselves around us, around me, under the guise of caring. They had opinions on everything: what I wore, what I posted, who I talked to. They treated me like an accessory to Liam, not a person. And he never once told them to stop. I kept hoping, praying, he'd stand up for me. But he never did. That morning, I looked around the room, and all I could feel was dread. Not cold feet. Not nerves. Just this heavy, choking fear that my life was about to become smaller than ever. I walked to the dresser, picked up my phone, stared at it for a long time. I thought about calling someone, leaving a note, something. But nothing felt right. No words could explain the storm in my chest. So I left the phone, took my wallet, stepped out of the back entrance, called an Uber, barefoot, veil still pinned in my hair. As the car pulled away, I didn't cry. I didn't feel brave either. I just felt empty. The driver didn't ask questions. He took me to the nearest train station, and from there I headed to a coastal town a few hours away. I had no plan. I just needed out. Somewhere quiet, somewhere without eyes watching me like I'd ruined the most magical day of their lives. Later, I heard what happened. Guests murmuring, staff scrambling. Liam running around the villa grounds, calling my name like I was just misplaced. His family? Furious. Cold. Unforgiving. I became the woman who ruined a perfect wedding. The runaway bride who broke a good man's heart. But they didn't know what it was like behind closed doors. They didn't see how I was slowly disappearing inside that relationship. How often I smiled when I wanted to scream. How many nights I wondered if this was just what love felt like, shrinking. Now, I live alone by the sea. I paint. I walk. I try to learn how to be with myself again. People think I ran away out of fear. But it wasn't fear. It was survival. I left the day of my wedding, not because I didn't love him once, but because I finally loved myself enough to stop pretending I still did. Story 3. I should have left the day of the wedding, but I did it 40 hours later. I'll spare you the long version, but the short of it is that my ex was emotionally and physically abusive during the 6 months leading up to our wedding day. We had eloped a year prior and planned a wedding party to celebrate our 1-year anniversary. My ex got absolutely wasted at the rehearsal dinner and initially refused to come home. When he finally did, I was having an anxiety attack. He sneered and said, "Just go to the hospital then." He did a line of cocaine and went back out with his friends to a strip club. He came back around 3 a.m., started yelling at me for nearly an hour while I lay in bed shaking and crying, begging him to let me sleep. He kept ripping the covers off me, shouting about what a horrible person I was. I completely disassociated on the day of the wedding. I was too embarrassed to call it off. The day after the celebration, he did the same thing again. That Monday morning, I packed up my dog and valuables and left. Bonus detail. My ex had hired pole dancers dressed as unicorns to perform at our wedding reception and had spent about $800 on cocaine in the previous month or so. He had only done coke once in the 3.5 years we were dating, so it wasn't a regular thing until then. And yet, he had the audacity to tell me he couldn't afford to buy me a ring. Story 4. There were 300 people in that ballroom. The chandeliers sparkled, the champagne flowed, and I remember thinking, this is the best day of my life. The string quartet was playing softly, the kind of music that makes everything feel like a movie. My dress fit like a dream, the flowers were perfect, and James, my groom, looked at me like I was the only person in the world. For a moment, I really believed everything was going to be okay. Then came the part in the ceremony no one ever expects to mean anything. If anyone objects to this union, the officiant paused. I smiled politely, already waiting for the next line. But then she stood up. Mia, my cousin, my best friend since we were kids. She stood up calm, hands slightly shaking, and said, I object. Everyone turned. You could hear chairs creak and champagne flutes being set down. I felt my heart stop. I object, she said again, her voice cracking now. Because the bride has been sleeping with my husband. For months. Silence. Nothing but silence. I saw James's face go white, then red, then something in between. His hands fell from mine like they were made of glass. My stomach dropped. I couldn't speak, I just stared at Mia, begging her with my eyes not to say more. But she did. She told them everything. How she'd known for months. How she'd found the texts. How she'd waited for this moment, with everyone there to say it out loud. I did the only thing I could think to do. I ran. I left the ballroom in my wedding dress, sobbing, my veil torn from my hair as I pushed past gasping relatives and confused guests. I didn't even make it to the limo, I just kept running. Somewhere. Anywhere. Away. James called off the wedding immediately. He never spoke to me again. Our entire family split down the middle. Some said Mia should have handled it privately. Others praised her for exposing me. Mia divorced Tom shortly after. I lost everything, my relationship, my family, and my dignity. No one looked at me the same again. And the worst part? The cake. 3 tiers of raspberry cream perfection. No one touched it. The staff said it stayed untouched until midnight, just sitting there, like a monument to the chaos we'd all just witnessed. They still talk about that day at the venue, apparently. The wedding where the bride ran out, and the cake went uneaten. Story 5. I never thought my wedding day would begin in silence and end in betrayal. It wasn't supposed to be a grand affair, just a quiet ceremony at the courthouse, 2 witnesses, and maybe lunch afterward. Anna didn't want the spotlight. She said modest was more meaningful. I believed her because I believed in us. I thought I was helping her start a new life here, and somewhere along the way, I fell in love. Completely. Stupidly. I stood outside the courthouse that morning with my brother and my best friend, holding a cheap bouquet of daisies because she said they reminded her of home. I checked my phone. 10:03, no message. I wasn't nervous, just excited. I kept telling myself she was probably running late, fixing her hair, picking the right shoes. Then I saw the courthouse clerk approach with an envelope in her hand. Are you Greg? She didn't look me in the eye, just handed me the note and walked away. Inside was one line, handwritten and shaky. I can't do this. I'm sorry. No explanation. No goodbye. Just that. Like I was an appointment she forgot to cancel. At first, I thought something terrible had happened. An accident, a panic attack, maybe even deportation. I called her voicemail. Messaged her, no reply. Hours passed. 10 days. Then a week. She was gone. Just gone. A few weeks later, I learned the truth from a mutual acquaintance. Anna had married someone else. Another man. Another courthouse. It turned out I wasn't her one. I was just her next. She'd been stringing me along for months, charming me, feeding me just enough affection to keep me close. And I was too in love to see it. The officiant still remembers me, apparently. I ran into him years later. He said he never forgot the look on my face when I read that note. It was like someone had flipped a switch and drained all the light from me. I wish I could say I bounced back quickly, but I didn't. I questioned everyone after that. Every kind word felt suspicious. Every new relationship came with walls I didn't know how to lower. Trust became something I rationed out like oxygen. As for Anna, I never saw her again. I don't know where she is or who she became. Maybe she found the life she was chasing. Or maybe she's still using people, still leaving notes. All I know is that day at the courthouse changed everything. Not just how I saw love, but how I saw myself. Story 6. I, 26 am now, 25 at the time, was supposed to marry my girlfriend Sarah, 25F now, 24 then, after 3 years together. Wedding was planned for a Saturday in September, small but nice ceremony at a vineyard, about 80 guests. Everything was paid for, RSVPs were in, I'd already picked up my tux. But about 2 weeks before the wedding, I brought up something that had been on my mind. I wanted us to sign a prenuptial agreement. Now before everyone jumps down my throat, let me explain. I work in tech, and I've been pretty successful for my age. I have investments, some cryptocurrency that's done really well, and I inherited a decent chunk when my grandfather passed. Nothing crazy, but probably around $400,000 in assets total. Sarah works as a graphic designer and makes good money, but nowhere near what I make. I thought it was a reasonable request. I wasn't trying to screw her over. I suggested we each get our own lawyers and make it fair for both of us. Hell, I was even willing to put in clauses that would give her more if we stayed married longer. Sarah's reaction was nuclear. She completely lost her shit. Started screaming that I didn't trust her, that I was already planning our divorce before we even got married, that I obviously didn't really love her if I was worried about money. If you loved me, you wouldn't need a piece of paper to protect yourself from me. I tried to stay calm and explain that it wasn't about not trusting her, it was just smart financial planning. Like getting car insurance. You don't get it because you plan to crash, you get it just in case. Bad analogy. She threw a lamp at me. This fight went on for days. She kept saying things like prenups are for people who don't believe in their marriage, and you're treating me like a gold digger. I kept trying to explain that it protects both of us, but she wouldn't hear it. Her friend got involved. Her sister called me an asshole. Her mom texted me saying I was starting the marriage off on the wrong foot. But here's the thing. My parents had a nasty divorce when I was 16. I watched my dad lose half of everything he'd worked for, including the house he'd inherited from his dad. I swore I'd never put myself in that position. So I held firm. I told Sarah that I loved her completely, but I needed this for my own peace of mind. I even offered to postpone the wedding so we could work through it with a counselor. Her response: if you need a prenup to marry me, then maybe we shouldn't get married at all. I thought she was bluffing. I said, Sarah, don't make this an ultimatum. We can figure this out. She doubled down. No prenup or no wedding. Choose. So I chose the prenup. She moved out that night. Now here's where it gets crazy. The wedding was still 10 days away at this point. I figured we'd cool off and work it out. I mean, we'd been together 3 years. We were supposed to be spending our lives together. Surely we could compromise on this. Nope. Sarah went full scorched earth. Started telling everyone that I was a controlling asshole who cared more about money than love. Posted on social media about how she dodged a bullet with someone who never really loved her. I was getting calls from wedding guests asking what happened. The vendors were asking about final payments. It was a nightmare. 3 days before the wedding, I finally accepted that this was really happening. I called the venue, the caterer, everyone, and officially canceled. Lost about $15,000 in deposits. But here's the kicker. The morning of what was supposed to be our wedding day, Sarah showed up at my apartment in her wedding dress. She was sobbing, saying she'd made a terrible mistake, that she'd been thinking about it all week and realized she was being stubborn. She said she'd sign whatever I wanted. She just wanted to get married. I stared at her standing there in that dress and realized something. If she could break up with me over this, if she could put me through 2 weeks of hell and public embarrassment, if she could try to turn our friends and family against me, then she was exactly the kind of person I needed a prenup to protect myself from. I told her it was too late, that her reaction had shown me who she really was, and I couldn't marry someone who would blow up our entire relationship over a reasonable request. She called me every name in the book, said I was heartless, that I never really loved her, that I was punishing her for having feelings. But you know what? I felt relieved, like I'd dodged a massive bullet. It's been almost a year now. I heard through mutual friends that Sarah's been telling people I'm a narcissistic sociopath who manipulated her for 3 years. Whatever helps her sleep at night. I'm single, focusing on my career, and honestly pretty happy. Yeah, It sucks that I wasted 3 years and $15,000, but better that than a lifetime with someone who thinks protecting your assets is a betrayal. And for anyone wondering, yes, I'll absolutely want a prenup with my next serious relationship, and I'll bring it up a lot earlier in the process. Edit. To everyone asking why I didn't bring it up sooner. Honestly, I thought about it but kept putting it off because I knew it would be a difficult conversation. Obviously, that was a mistake. Edit 2. For those saying I was wrong, I respectfully disagree. If someone truly loves you and wants what's best for both of you, they shouldn't have a problem with protecting both parties legally. Her reaction told me everything I needed to know. Edit 3. Sarah, if you're hate reading this, the answer is still no. And yes, I'm still going to want a prenup with whoever I marry next. Edit 4. Thanks for the gold, kind stranger. Apparently my financial planning extends to Reddit Karma too. Story 7. Jake and I had both promised his parents that we would remain abstinent until marriage. It was more than just a personal commitment, it was a promise to our families, something that carried a lot of meaning and expectation. We wanted to honor that vow because we believed in it and because it was important to Jake's parents. I thought that promise helped build the trust between us all, and I really wanted to live up to it. But there was something I had never shared with anyone, something from my past that I was afraid would change everything. Years before I met Jake, I had broken that vow with someone else. At the time, it was a mistake I deeply regretted, but I didn't know how to explain it or if I even should. I was scared of losing Jake, of losing his family's respect, and of losing the life I hoped we would build together. When our wedding day finally arrived, I decided I had to be honest. I told Jake's parents what had happened, hoping that the truth, though painful, would at least show them I was sincere. But instead of understanding, their reaction was one of anger and disappointment. They felt betrayed, like I had disrespected everything they believed in. They pressured Jake to call off the wedding, and I could see how torn he was caught between his love for me and the expectations of his family. The pain of that day is something I'll never forget. Jake couldn't go through with it. He left me standing there at the altar, and in that moment, I felt utterly abandoned and humiliated. It wasn't just about losing Jake. It was losing the family I had hoped to be a part of and the future I had dreamed about. After that, I moved away, trying to heal and put the heartbreak behind me. Even now, the pain lingers. I know Jake struggled just as much, trapped between faith, family, and his own feelings. It wasn't an easy choice for either of us, and the regret has stayed with him for a long time. Sometimes I wonder if things might have been different if I had kept my secret, or if his family could have forgiven me. But I also know that living with honesty was the only way I could be true to myself, even if it cost me everything. Story 8. Okay, I'm finally ready to share this. It's something I've kept to myself for a long time because it was so painful, but maybe someone out there needs to hear it. I was supposed to marry Daniel. I dreamed about that day forever, the dress, the ceremony, all the excitement of starting a life together. We'd been together for years, and I thought everything was perfect. But then, just hours before the wedding, Daniel pulled the rug out from under me. He said he had doubts about my loyalty. I still don't fully understand what that even meant to him, but those words crushed me. To have the person you love most suddenly question you, especially at the altar, was absolutely devastating. After that, I didn't know what to do with myself. I was heartbroken, embarrassed, and honestly a little lost. I felt like everyone was staring and judging, and I just wanted to disappear. Then, out of nowhere, I got a job as a caregiver for this wealthy man who'd been paralyzed after an accident. It was a huge change from my plans, but I took it because I needed something to hold on to, something that wasn't tied to my pain. At first, it was just a job, but over time, the man I cared for and I started to really connect. He was kind, patient, and listened in a way most people didn't. We talked about life, loss, and all the things I didn't feel comfortable sharing with anyone else. That connection gave me a safe place to heal. And then slowly, something amazing happened. I found love again. It wasn't flashy or dramatic like I thought it would be. It was quiet, steady, and real. It didn't erase the past, but it helped me move forward. When Daniel tried to come back later, asking for a second chance, I realized I wasn't the same person anymore. I had grown stronger, and I was no longer willing to go back to what broke me. Looking back, losing Daniel was one of the hardest things I've ever experienced, but it pushed me into a new chapter. Sometimes life doesn't go as planned, but that doesn't mean it can't turn out better than you imagined. Thanks for reading if you made it this far. Just know no matter how dark it feels, You can come out the other side. Story 9. This all happened just 2 weeks before my sister's wedding. During his bachelor party, my sister flew to a different state to get closure from an ex. Meanwhile, the groom wasn't exactly innocent either. He disappeared during the bachelor party and was later found to be trying to hook up with girls and do drugs as a last wild night before getting married. My boyfriend at the time, who was part of the bachelor party, told me that when they went back to the hotel room to look for the groom, they found evidence of a hooker and drugs. Apparently, the groom was being turned down everywhere he went, so I guess he figured he might as well get what he could. After all this came out, my mom tried to convince my sister to go through with the wedding and just get couples counseling. Obviously, that didn't go over well. My dad, who had paid for the venue and catering, decided they'd still have a party at the venue, but they didn't invite my sister. My boyfriend, now my husband, calls it the non-wedding whenever he talks about it. So much fun, right? They had dated for 4 years and were engaged for 6 years total. Less than a year later, the groom married the girl he had been cheating on my sister with during their entire engagement, and even gave this girl the same engagement ring my sister wore for 2 years. Tacky, if you ask me. In the end, my sister ended up marrying the ex she flew to another state to get closure from. Story 10. I still remember that rehearsal dinner like it was yesterday, the night before what was supposed to be the best day of my life. Everyone was excited, the room buzzing with happy chatter. Then out of nowhere, this stranger walks up to Ryan, my fiancé, and hands him some legal papers. A woman claimed that Ryan had a 5-year-old son, a son he'd never told me about. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The whole room went quiet, and I just stared at him, waiting for some kind of explanation. Ryan finally admitted he'd known about the kid all along, but was too scared to tell me because he thought it would ruin everything: the wedding, our future. I was crushed, absolutely devastated. How do you even process something like that? Hours later, with the venue all decorated and everyone waiting, I made the hardest decision of my life. I called off the wedding. The place was so quiet afterward, and guests were sent home with awkward apologies. It felt like my whole world was falling apart. Ryan tried to reach out, but I just couldn't do it. I cut off contact and moved to a new city to try to heal. Meanwhile, the child's mother sued him for child support, and his reputation took a huge hit. Now looking back, I realize how important honesty is in any relationship. I share my story because I want others to understand that hiding the truth only leads to heartbreak. It was painful, yes, but it taught me to stand up for myself and demand the respect I deserve. Story 11. I was just minutes away from walking down the aisle, my dress tight around me, heart pounding like crazy. Everything had been planned perfectly: an intimate wedding with about 80 guests, beautiful flowers, the whole 9 yards. I'd been dreaming about this day for years. But then, just before the ceremony, my cousin pulled me aside and showed me a Facebook message that changed everything. A woman had messaged her, claiming that Derek, my fiancé, had a 3-year-old son with her. There were photos too. Pictures of Derek with a little toddler, dated just last month. My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. For years together, and he had been hiding an entire family from me? I confronted him in the church basement, away from everyone. At first, he tried to deny it, but eventually, he broke down and admitted it. He said he meant to tell me, but was scared. Scared it would ruin the wedding. Scared it would ruin us. I felt sick, betrayed, and completely shattered. How do you process that? How do you trust someone after they've kept something that big from you? I couldn't do it. I ripped off my ring, tears streaming down my face. I told the officiant to cancel the ceremony. I walked out through the back door while guests whispered, and my mom tried to calm everyone. Derek begged me to stay, to talk, to work it out. But I couldn't. I got into my car and drove straight to my sister's house, sobbing the entire way. The venue kept our deposit, and I spent weeks returning gifts and trying to explain to friends and family why the wedding was called off. The rumors spread quickly. I heard Derek was still with that woman. I'm slowly rebuilding my life now. The betrayal still hurts, and sometimes it feels like it will never fully go away. But I've learned to listen to my gut, even when it's hard. Because in the end, trusting someone who lies about something so huge isn't worth it. If you're reading this and something feels off, don't ignore it. Trust yourself. Story 12. I never thought I'd be the one to leave someone at the altar. I'm still processing it, but here's what happened. I was 30, in a hotel suite, my white dress zipped up, hair curled, ready to marry Josh. We'd been together for 5 years and planned a small wedding. 50 guests, a local winery, and string lights everywhere. I was nervous but excited. Then, 20 minutes before the ceremony, my maid of honor, Sarah, pulled me aside, her face pale. She showed me texts she'd just gotten from a mutual friend. Josh had been secretly meeting his ex, Lisa, for months. The friend saw them at a bar last week, kissing, and sent proof, blurry photos, but it was him. My stomach dropped. I confronted Josh in the groom's room. He didn't deny it, just mumbled about needing closure. Closure? On our wedding day. I felt like I'd been slapped. I loved him and trusted him, but those photos burned into my brain. I told him I couldn't do it, ripped off my veil, and walked out past the confused caterers. Sarah followed, yelling at Josh's best man, who tried to defend him. The guests were already seated, waiting. My dad had to announce the wedding was off. I heard gasps as I got into my car and drove to my apartment. Josh called nonstop, swearing it was a mistake, but I blocked him. My mom said I should have talked it out, but how do you marry someone who's sneaking around days before? The winery kept half our deposit, and I had to email apologies to guests. Some still don't get why I overreacted. Josh moved out of our place, and I heard he's back with Lisa. I'm angry, humiliated, but mostly relieved. I almost married a lie. I'm 31 now, rebuilding, but I flinch at every "you'll find someone" comment. Trust is hard. If you're reading this, don't ignore red flags. I did, and it cost me my wedding day. Story 13. I thought Amir was the one. We planned a beautiful wedding with about 70 guests. Everything was perfect. The flowers smelled amazing, the venue was stunning, and I was buzzing with excitement. But just hours before walking down the aisle, everything came crashing down. His cousin accidentally spilled the secret to my friend Amir, didn't want to marry me for love. He needed the marriage for a green card. My heart stopped. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind. I confronted Amir in the quiet of the hotel room, desperate for the truth. At first, he tried to dodge it, but then he looked me straight in the eye and said, "I love you too, but I need to stay in this country." That hit me like a punch to the gut. How do you process that? The man you love confessing he's using you? I felt like a fool. I didn't hesitate. I called off the wedding right then and there. I left him sitting alone in the hotel room while confusion swirled outside, guests wondering what was happening, and my parents furious and heartbroken. The flowers? Donated. The deposit? Lost. Amir begged and apologized, but I blocked him. I had to protect myself. Now, I'm slowly picking up the pieces, stronger but guarded. I've learned something painful but true. Always ask about intentions early on. Because love feels beautiful until it's not. Story 14. I was so ready to marry Jenna, my partner of 3 years. We had spent months planning the perfect garden, wedding about 60 of our closest friends and family, delicate flowers, twinkling fairy lights, and a sense of joy in the air. I was nervous but happy, excited to finally say, I do, to someone I loved and trusted deeply. Then, that very morning, everything came crashing down. I received a bank alert, a huge withdrawal from our joint account. $10,000. My heart dropped. I scrambled to open the banking app and saw the transfer had been made to Jenna's sister. I couldn't wrap my head around it. How could Jenna do this? We had always been open about money, sharing everything. I felt blindsided and confused. I found her in the bridal suite and confronted her. At first, she tried to brush it off. Then the truth came out. She'd been siphoning money from our account for months, sending it to her sister, promising she would pay it back after the wedding. I was shattered. This wasn't just about the money. It was about trust, something I thought we had in abundance. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected. I made the painful decision to call off the ceremony. I had to be honest with myself and everyone else. I couldn't marry someone who'd been deceiving me. I told the guests to leave, watching their confused and shocked faces as the celebration turned into a quiet, empty garden. My family was angry and hurt for me, but Jenna's family quickly turned against me. They called me heartless and cold, blaming me for ruining what should have been a joyful day. The caterer generously donated the food to a local shelter, but we lost the venue deposit, adding financial loss to emotional pain. Jenna moved out shortly after, and ever since, I've been untangling the financial mess she left behind. It's been a slow, difficult process to heal, not just from the betrayal, but from the loss of what I thought our future would be. Now, I check every single bank alert with suspicion. I've learned the hard way not to ignore the little warning signs, because sometimes they're not so little after all. If you ever get that weird feeling or notice something odd, trust it. It might save you from heartbreak like mine. Story 15. I have this friend actually. We work together, and his story about his wedding is absolutely wild. So his family's from Europe, pretty wealthy, owning estates, and they do this whole grand tradition. His fiancée is from Kentucky, and the families literally flew in from all over the world to this private island estate for a week of celebrations. It was straight out of a movie, getting married by the family's own priest in their private church, a huge reception, the works. Rumor was the family dropped over $1 million on it. After the reception, they jetted off to Spain for their honeymoon. The morning after, this is where it gets insane. My friend wakes up, steps out onto the balcony, and whistles to the flower guy down in the plaza. He yells out his room number, and then he heads straight for the shower. Now, his new wife doesn't get what's going on. She sees 3 women walking across the plaza right after the whistle and jumps to the worst conclusion. She thinks he was literally whistling at these women and giving them his room number. Can you imagine? So, she packs her bags, storms out of the hotel, and just leaves him there. He comes out of the shower, finds the flower guy asking for money, pays him, and then goes to find her, but she's gone. His phone's missing, and so is her luggage. Total nightmare. He calls his brother to ring his phone and tries to reach her, but she's ignoring all calls. Eventually, he gets her mom on the line, who immediately starts cursing him out for whistling at girls. He tries to explain, but she just calls him a cheater. And that was it. He never saw her again. They never even officially divorced because the marriage certificate was never filed. She kept the wedding and engagement rings, including his grandmother's diamond. She even posted the wedding photos all over social media like nothing happened. Meanwhile, when he got back to the US, she'd already moved out of the place they shared. The whole thing lasted less than 18 hours. They ended up in lawsuits over those rings for 2 years. Honestly, it's the craziest wedding story I've ever heard, and from my friend's point of view, it was a total nightmare from start to finish. Story 16. Oh man, you won't believe this story about my good friend. She was with her boyfriend for like 9 years, but honestly, their relationship was mostly just out of convenience. They didn't really connect on a deep level or share much in common, but they stuck it out anyway. The day of their wedding, she was an absolute wreck, panicking and telling everyone she didn't want to go through with it. But everyone just told her it was normal nerves and to push through. So the wedding happened. Everything looked perfect on the outside. Friends and family were smiling. The ceremony went smoothly, and no one suspected a thing. But here's the kicker. The day after, she had this huge realization that she really didn't want to be with him anymore. It was like a switch flipped. They never mailed in the official marriage documents because, honestly, they figured without that paperwork, they weren't legally married. It was like they were pretending the whole thing didn't happen. A couple of months later, he moved out, and they officially ended things. Then, fast forward about a year or so, and this guy gets a new girlfriend. They're talking about getting married themselves, and out of the blue, my friend gets a text from him. He says something like, "Hey, I just found out that the officiant or someone else actually mailed in our marriage documents, so we are legally married." Talk about a plot twist. She was totally blindsided. So here she is, thinking she was never really married, and suddenly it turns out she was all this time. This whole mess started back in 2019, but she only just finalized the divorce last month. And the funniest part? She's been with her current boyfriend for 2 years now and is pregnant with his baby. So now I always joke that technically she's having a kid with someone who isn't her legal husband. It's crazy how life throws these curveballs, right? Story 17. I have a friend who really believes in signs, like signs straight from heaven. About a week before her wedding, she went to church to pray, hoping for guidance and a strong, happy marriage ahead. As she was sitting there, deep in prayer, something weird happened. The whole church suddenly grew darker. A thick cloud passed over the sun, and the bright light that usually poured through the stained glass windows dimmed significantly. It was like the whole place went from warm and hopeful to cold and shadowed in a matter of seconds. For her, that moment wasn't just a random weather quirk. It felt like a clear, unmistakable sign that things weren't right. She said later she could feel this heavy weight in her heart, a kind of warning she couldn't ignore. Without hesitation, she called off the wedding and cut off all contact with the fiancé. She told him, plain and simple, that it was over. Her family and close friends were 100% behind her. They admired her courage to trust her intuition and walk away, even if the reason seemed a little unusual to some. Honestly, there were a few people who laughed at the idea that a shadow in a church could stop a wedding. But she stood firm. Then, within the year, the truth started to unravel, and that sign from the church suddenly made perfect sense. It turned out her fiancé was hiding a serious gambling addiction. He was drowning in debt he'd never told anyone about. But it didn't stop there. He had actually forged her signature on several fake loan contracts, trying to make it look like she owed him money. When she refused to get involved or give him any more chances, he went after her family, claiming that since she owed him, they were responsible too. He harassed them, trying to collect debts that were completely fabricated. Looking back, that darkening of the church wasn't just a coincidence, it was like a warning light flashing in the sky, a divine nudge that saved her from a nightmare. She often says that trusting that moment, trusting what she felt in her heart, was the bravest and smartest thing she's ever done. It's wild to think how one moment of shadow changed her whole future and saved her from a man who was nothing like she thought he was. Story 18. Not on the wedding day itself, but just a couple of days after it all fell apart. 2 days after my wedding, after all the guests had gone home and the excitement had died down, my partner disappeared. Completely MIA for a solid 24 hours. No calls, no texts, no explanation. It was like he vanished into thin air. Eventually, I found out what happened. He spent the entire night at an ayahuasca ceremony with his yoga instructor, the same woman he was secretly seeing behind my back. When he finally walked through the door after being gone all day, his first words to me were cold and crushing. "I don't love you anymore." That same day, I stumbled upon boxes of her things packed up in our garage. He'd already been planning to move her into our house. How or why, he let me go through with the wedding I'll never understand. It was devastating, not just for me, but for my family, who had flown out from all over just to be there for the wedding. They ended up getting married a couple of months later. Turns out, this had been going on for quite some time. Now they're divorced, so I guess there's that silver lining, but it doesn't make the pain any easier to carry. Story 19. That story really stuck with me, one of those wild, unforgettable life twists. It happened back in the early 70s in LA. A friend of mine gave a ride to 2 girls hitchhiking and ended up striking up a friendship with one of them. They dated for a bit, and after about a year, she moved in with him. They planned their wedding and invited family and friends. His family even flew in all the way from Detroit. The big day came. Everyone was seated, the church was packed, and the wedding march started playing. But then, the church doors didn't open. After an awkward pause, the door finally cracked open, and it was just her father, standing there. He said, "Sorry, she had to use the bathroom. It'll be a minute." Minutes passed, then more time. Her mother went to check on her, and found she was nowhere to be found. The only thing left behind, her wedding dress at their apartment. My friend was absolutely devastated. He sat on the altar steps, waiting in disbelief. When he found out about the dress, he and his best man just said, "Screw it," and went on the honeymoon anyway, getting drunk the entire time. When he got back, her stuff was completely gone. No note, no explanation, just gone. 18 months later, out of the blue, she showed up at his doorstep crying, apologizing, and begging him to marry her. He said, "Closing that door in her face without saying a word was one of the best moments of my life." By then, he had moved on. He was a remarkable guy full of resilience and wild life chapters. He was a Navy SEAL who woke up in a body bag in Vietnam because they thought he was dead. After recovering, he was heading to his first post-service job polishing marble. But when he got to the parking lot, he just couldn't get out of the car. He went home, and his mom told him a friend had called. Their band just signed with Motown and wanted him to join them. He ended up as a backup and harmony singer for Rare Earth, the first white rock band signed with Motown, famous for songs like Get Ready and I Just Want to Celebrate. Life threw him curveballs, but he kept swinging. Left at the altar? Just one chapter in a story full of incredible twists. Story 20. I was moments away from marrying Claire in a tiny church with 40 close friends and family waiting. That morning, my brother dropped a bombshell: court records proving Claire was already married. Not just once, but she'd never gotten divorced. Everything she told me about being single? A complete lie. I confronted her, and she broke down, confessing she'd hidden it all to avoid complications. 2 years of my life, built on a web of deception. My heart shattered. I canceled the wedding right there. I had to tell our guests. Some were shocked, others whispered behind my back, questioning how I didn't know. Claire begged, cried, and pleaded for forgiveness, but the betrayal cut too deep. I packed my bags and moved out that week. The venue only gave back half our deposit, and the cake left untouched was donated to a homeless shelter. I felt like my entire future was ripped away in one morning. Since then, I've made it my mission to Google everyone I date. Because trust isn't just important, it's everything. And I refuse to be blindsided like that again. Story 21. Not the day of the wedding, but close enough to still be a nightmare. My cousin called off her wedding after finding out two devastating truths almost simultaneously. She was pregnant, and the guy she was about to marry was a serious opioid addict. Not just that, he'd been stealing from her, her siblings, her parents, and even our grandparents. The worst part, during Thanksgiving, right after my granddad had serious surgery, this guy actually raided their medicine cabinet for drugs. I mean, imagine the betrayal and fear in that family. They tried to hold it together for the baby's sake, but it was a ticking time bomb. The addiction was a beast that tore everything apart. Fast forward a bit, and this guy ended up in and out of jail for various drug-related crimes, escalated to heroin, probably fentanyl, and now he's locked up in federal prison. Oh, and if that wasn't enough, he's also on the sex offender registry, last I heard. My cousin's kid, thankfully, is an amazing little human, but man, my cousin's judgment? Terrible. When I first met the guy, I got that primal, hair on the back of your neck kind of fear, like all the alarm bells were screaming at once. I wish I'd been able to say something sooner. It's one of those stories that just sticks with you, a brutal reminder that sometimes the biggest disasters are the ones you never saw coming. Story 22. I tried. God, I really tried. Maybe not hard enough, but I gave it everything I had. This was with my first, and it was a nightmare from the start. The entire night before the wedding, she was yelling at me nonstop. The AC in our apartment broke down, and all we had were 2 floor fans stacked one on top of the other. She lost it, literally lost it, and kicked those fans over at me like I was the enemy. A full-on tantrum. Neighbors heard the commotion and called the cops. When they showed up, they only checked her for bruises, completely ignoring my side. And as they left, she smirked and said, "If I wanted you in jail, all I had to say was you hit me." So, I slept on the couch that night. No fans either, she took both. The next morning, she left me to get ready for the wedding without a word. I woke up, looked around at the stifling heat, and said, "F this." I went right back to sleep. When my family called, I screened their first 50 calls. When I finally answered, all I could say was, "I'm not getting married." Sure enough, they showed up at my place later that day, turning it into a huge confrontation. They brushed off every red flag I'd raised before. The wedding happened anyway. I look miserable in those photos. She looks like the devil wearing a crown. What followed were 7 long years of abuse. Physical, emotional, and mental. She had every tool in the book. More incidents with the cops, more broken promises. Yeah, I wasn't perfect, I was a lazy young adult back then, but she never lifted me up or supported me. Instead, it was one put down after another. When my family finally learned what I'd been through, all I heard was, "Why did you marry her?" Because I tried. I tried and I failed. We're divorced now. We both remarried. I won't lie, I feel bad for the poor guy she married next. I found someone who actually motivates me, who builds me up instead of tearing me down. We have kids, a home, cars, a boat, land out in East Oklahoma. Life's better. If there's one thing I want to say, don't waste your life with someone who drags you under. It took me years to learn that, but if I could go back, I'd leave at the first broken fan. Story 23. A second cousin of mine, quiet, shy, and a bit of a nerd, was the kind of guy who never quite found his footing socially. He was British, and thanks to a scholarship, he landed at a college in the US. That's where he met the woman who would become his wife, or so he thought. She was the only woman I ever knew him to be involved with romantically. Her family was deeply religious. Her dad was a pastor, and from the start, there was pressure to keep everything perfect. They moved quickly, engagement, wedding, all wrapped up in a neat little package. My cousin believed they were genuinely in love, despite the whirlwind pace. But on their wedding night, the truth dropped like a bombshell. She confessed to him that she was actually a lesbian, madly in love with her maid of honor. The marriage was never about love, it was a carefully constructed facade to keep her family from disowning her. She asked him if he'd be her cover, the female equivalent of a beard, because if her family found out, it would mean utter rejection. My cousin was blindsided, heartbroken, and completely devastated. What he thought was the start of a lifelong partnership turned out to be nothing more than a loveless charade. He quickly annulled the marriage, trying to salvage what was left of his dignity. Meanwhile, her family did exactly what she feared. They disowned her. The whole ordeal was whispered about in hushed, polite tones by my mom and aunties, very British and proper about it all. As a teenager, I found the situation kind of darkly funny, an awkward secret wrapped in religious shame. But now, looking back, I can't help but feel for my cousin. He lost not only his first love, but also a piece of his trust in people. It's one of those stories that sticks with you, how love, expectations, and identity can collide in such painful and complicated ways. Story 24. This isn't my story, but it's one that stayed with me for a long time, something a close friend went through. She was eagerly planning her wedding, filled with all the excitement and nerves that come with such a huge day. The guest list was ready, the venue booked, and her family was traveling to be there, especially her mother, who was her rock. But just hours before the ceremony, tragedy struck. On the way to the wedding, her mother was involved in a major accident, one so severe that she didn't survive. The news shattered my friend's world. Losing her mom, her biggest supporter, just before the day she was supposed to start a new chapter with her fiancé, was unbearable. With unimaginable grief weighing down on her, she made the painful decision to cancel the wedding. The joy and hope she once felt were replaced by a profound sadness. I don't believe she ever rescheduled or went through with marrying. That groom her heart wasn't in it anymore. The loss was too raw, too overwhelming. It's a haunting reminder that sometimes life's cruel twists can change everything in an instant, and that grief can overshadow even the most joyful moments. Story 25. I was supposed to marry Lena in a small chapel with 50 guests, intimate, beautiful, everything planned down to the ribbon colors and playlist. But that morning, I woke up drenched in sweat, heart racing. I wasn't just nervous. I was suffocating. Debt was piling up, my job was on the line, and somewhere deep down, I realized I was doing this for everyone but myself. 3 hours before the ceremony, I pulled Lena aside in her dressing room, veil in hand, tears already welling, and told her I couldn't go through with it. She dropped her bouquet and just stared. Then she started crying, not screaming, not angry. Just this soft, broken sob that gutted me more than any slap ever could. We called it off on the spot. I had to walk out and personally explain to the guests that there'd be no wedding. My mother literally slapped me in front of my friends. My dad called me a disgrace. One uncle tried to convince Lena to marry me anyway because the food was already paid for. The venue refused to return more than half the deposit. The cake, 3 tiers of lemon blueberry perfection, were donated to a shelter. I went home to a tiny apartment that night, alone in my tux. I'm in therapy now. Lena and I still talk. We're not together, but we're not enemies. She deserved better than a half-present groom. What did I learn? Don't marry someone just because you think you're supposed to. Doubt isn't a phase, and silence is a slow poison. Speak now before the aisle becomes a prison. Story 26. This story didn't happen to me, but to a friend I met during college orientation. His name was Daniel. From the start, Daniel seemed different. He wasn't just quiet, he was distant, like someone moving through a fog the rest of us couldn't see. He was polite, showed up when he needed to, but he wasn't really there. There was a sadness in his eyes I couldn't place. After a few weeks, when we'd had enough late-night talks and shared enough cheap cafeteria meals, he told me why. Daniel had just lost his wife. They were both 18. He and his girlfriend, Emily, had been together since middle school, true childhood sweethearts. Everyone who knew them said it was the kind of love you only see once in a lifetime. They grew up together, laughed together, and planned their future together. They had the kind of connection that made you believe in soulmates. But right after high school graduation, Emily was diagnosed with an aggressive, terminal illness. Out of nowhere. Doctors gave her maybe 6 weeks. That was it. Daniel didn't wait. He proposed immediately. They held a small ceremony in the hospital with her family and a few friends. She wore a simple white dress and a flower crown. Her smile was tired but genuine. I've seen one photo, Daniel's holding her hand like it's the last solid thing in the world. And for him, it probably was. They were husband and wife for less than 8 hours before she passed away. 8 hours. Daniel never even got a full day of marriage. 1 minute he was placing a ring on her finger, and the next he was holding her hand as her heart stopped. No one prepares you for that at 18. He came to college anyway because it was part of the plan they'd made together. But he wasn't ready. The grief was too raw, too real. I watched him try to blend in while his whole world had been torn in half. By the end of the semester, Daniel dropped out, packed his things and left. I never saw him again, but I've never forgotten him. That kind of love is rare. That kind of loss is shattering. And what hit me hardest is that he still tried to show up, to move forward, even when everything inside him must have been screaming. People underestimate young love all the time. But Daniel loved Emily with the kind of depth most people will never understand. And I carry their story with me quietly because it reminds me how fragile life is and how real love can be, even when it doesn't last forever. Story 27. I was set to marry Claire in a small church with 50 guests, family, friends, flowers, the whole setup. That morning, just hours before the ceremony, my brother handed me court records he'd found. Claire was still legally married to another man. No divorce, no separation finalized, just flat-out married. She had always told me she was single, no baggage. When I confronted her, she broke down crying, saying she didn't mean to hurt me and only kept it secret to avoid complications. Complications? That's not a little white lie, that's betrayal. I canceled the wedding on the spot. Some guests were shocked, others quietly left. I stood in front of everyone and told them the truth myself. My parents were stunned, but they backed me. Claire tried to explain, to apologize, and even begged for another chance. But how do you marry someone who's already married? I moved out that week. The venue kept half the deposit, and the cake went to a local shelter. Since then, I've learned my lesson. I Google everyone I date now. Truth isn't optional, it's everything. Story 28. My cousin thought she had it all figured out, recently engaged, expecting her first child, and planning a future with the guy she thought she'd grow old with. Then came the shock. She found out she was pregnant, and almost immediately after, discovered her fiancé had been stealing from everyone in the family. Pills, cash, jewelry, you name it. He even raided our grandparents' medicine cabinet just days after our grandfather had major surgery. That was the moment it all started to fall apart. Turns out, he was a full-blown opioid addict. They tried to stick it out for the baby, but the lies, theft, and manipulation caught up fast. He spiraled deeper: heroin, then fentanyl. Multiple arrests followed. Eventually, he landed in federal prison. As if that weren't enough, he's now also on the sex offender registry. The craziest part? We all saw the red flags. I remember meeting him once and instantly getting that creepy, skin-crawling feeling. My cousin didn't want to hear it back then. Now she admits she ignored every warning sign. Her kid, thankfully, is amazing, smart, kind, and full of potential. But that chapter of her life? A total nightmare. Story 29. My brother was supposed to get married on a perfect day. The whole family was there, guests dressed up, and everything was set. But when it was time for the groom to show up, he was nowhere to be found. I got a text from my other brother, who was also in the wedding party, telling me to meet me on the stairs. When I got there, he looked uneasy and said, Matt's not coming. That's when I had to walk back into the bridal suite, where I wasn't just the groom's sister. I was also the maid of honor, and break the news. The groom wasn't showing up. You can imagine the meltdown that followed. The bride was devastated, on the edge, so for the next 3 days, I was basically on suicide watch. Meanwhile, Matt was long gone, speeding to Atlantic City with our third brother and some friends, escaping the chaos. The whole thing blew up because Matt had found out that the bride had cheated on him days before. When he tried to call off the wedding, she threatened to kill herself if he did. So instead of confronting her, he chose to disappear on the wedding day. To top it off, the bride's mom tried to sue Matt for the cost of the wedding, but backed off fast when we showed proof of the affair. We ended up throwing a massive party anyway because a ton of money was already spent, but that day will forever be the family's wildest, most unforgettable disaster. Story 30. It wasn't quite the day of the wedding, but it felt just as devastating when I left my partner 3 months before we were supposed to tie the knot. We had already sent out invites and paid the venue, and most vendors. The whole thing was set. We'd been together for 9 years and engaged for 1. But here's the truth. I hadn't been in love for years. I just didn't have the courage to admit it. I was a community-less man-child, stuck on a runaway train headed for disaster, afraid to get off because it felt like the only track left. As the wedding day drew closer, the weight of what I was about to commit to crushed me. Not just a life with someone I no longer loved, but being the absent husband to a woman I still cared deeply about. The fear of hurting her kept me silent for so long. Finally, I jumped off that train. It freaking hurt. The crash was inevitable, but I got off before it completely wrecked both of us. Looking back, I regret the years I spent lying to myself and to her, but I take solace knowing I gave her stability when she needed it most. Now, for years later, I realized so much of my fear and inability to love wasn't about her, it was about my own inner struggles. I'm 6 months into a new relationship where I'm finally accepted for who I am, no performances, no pretending. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Story 31. It wasn't the day of the wedding, but just 2 days before, I made the hardest decision I've ever faced. I called it off. I was stuck in an extremely abusive and toxic relationship, one that had slowly chipped away at me for years. That night, after yet another anxiety-fueled sleepless stretch, I realized I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. I needed out for my sanity, my health, and my future. Physically, I was falling apart. I lost so much weight even though I've always been petite, developed stomach problems that no doctor could fully explain, and was utterly exhausted all the time. Mentally, I was drained, scared, hopeless, and trapped in a nightmare I thought I couldn't escape. The wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, but instead, it felt like a ticking time bomb. I knew continuing down this path meant losing myself completely. The hardest part wasn't just ending the relationship, it was facing the fallout. The non-refundable deposits, the guests who were already RSVP'd, and the family and friends who expected a celebration. Explaining why I was calling off a wedding so close to the date took more courage than I thought I had. But no amount of money or disappointment was worth sacrificing my well-being. When I finally told him it was over, I expected devastation, heartbreak, maybe regret. What I didn't expect was relief. Pure, unfiltered relief. A lightness I hadn't felt in years. That man had been my best friend before things turned toxic. I thought losing that connection meant I'd never find anything like it again. I was so wrong. Walking away was terrifying, yes, but it saved me. It gave me the chance to heal, to rediscover myself, and to realize that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say no to pain, to fear, to a life that isn't meant for you. 2 days before the wedding, I chose freedom, and it was the best decision I've ever made. Story 32. My wife's cousin was head over heels in love with an Indian guy she'd been dating for a while. For months, she was over the moon, planning every detail of the wedding, dreaming about their future together. It was, without a doubt, one of the happiest times of her life. But then, on the day of the wedding, something nobody expected happened. All the guests arrived dressed to the nines, the flowers were perfect, the venue was buzzing with excitement, and the groom? He was a complete no-show. Nobody could figure out why. The confusion and shock hung thick in the air. What came out afterward was heartbreaking. Turns out, she had been quietly sending him money for this, that, and everything in between. The promises he made were all a sham. The day before, he had even flown over just to keep up appearances. It was all a cruel act. She was utterly devastated. The betrayal cut deep and left her broken. After that, she never dated again. Life didn't give her much more time. She passed away from cancer just before the COVID pandemic hit. It was tragic on so many levels: a love story shattered, a life cut short, and a heartbreak that stayed with her until the very end. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.